Hello, Lenawee County. My name is Bryan Vish, and I sat down with Congressman Tim Walberg this week in Lenawee.
Accurate, dependable, and late breaking. This is local and state news on WLEN, Lenawee's local news station.
Last week, I sat down with congressional candidate Christian Vukasovic as part of WLEN's effort to give voters a chance to hear directly from those seeking to represent Michigan's 5th Congressional District. This week, I am continuing that conversation with incumbent Congressman Tim Walberg. As with last week's interview, Congressman Walberg was offered the same amount of time and opportunity to address many of the same topics, including Medicaid, SNAP benefits, education, Great Lakes policy, government spending, and bipartisan cooperation. Before we begin, one quick note though. A technical issue prevented Google Meet from capturing the video during the first minute and a half of that conversation. The audio was recorded in full, and you'll see a still image of Congressman Walberg during that portion of the interview. With that, here's my conversation with Congressman Tim Walberg. So thank you again for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it, especially with as busy a schedule as you have. You frequently do speak about working families, obviously, with us being in a very working class district. The vote for the 2025 budget package has opponents saying that it could reduce Medicaid funding. Would you be able to explain why a Medicaid recipient here in Lenawee County would be able to view that vote as a vote in their best interest?
Well, I could simply say that those that are putting out that misinformation are basing it upon the fact of reducing spending, but not reducing fraud. $6.2 billion were spent on illegals. And what we did in the Working Families Tax Cut Bill, otherwise known as One Big Beautiful Bill, was to remove that $6.2 billion, and I say that again, $6.2 billion of fraudulent payments going to illegal aliens that shouldn't have gone there. Where would those funds go if they didn't go to illegals? They could go into the hopper of legally receiving individuals for Medicaid funding. That was our purpose, and that in fact is what's being done. The more dollars we have that could go from that fund, Medicaid, to the truly needy people that meet all the requirements for receiving Medicaid, the better they are. If my opponents and the Democrat Party want to continue paying taxpayer dollars that are meant as a social safety net for Medicaid recipients that genuinely have those needs, so be it. But I'll fight against that, and that's what my vote was for, to make sure that we had the dollars going to the right people.
Excellent. So I did want to add, so that's basically where the funding was going, was towards, you're saying, misuse of the tax funds that were contributing to overinflated costs. Is that what I'm understanding correctly? I want to make sure.
Absolutely. Every dime that went out went to somebody.
Okay.
Every dime that went to someone who shouldn't have been receiving it was a dime taken away from those who did have needs and should have been receiving it. That's where we found the savings, by cutting out those that shouldn't have it and ultimately securing Medicaid in a better way for those that genuinely have met the requirements for Medicaid services.
Okay, excellent. So moving forward from there, you have also argued, government spending needs to be controlled, and I think a lot of folks would agree with you on that particular front. If a constituent here loses SNAP benefits or Medicaid coverage as a result of policies, is that would that be considered an acceptable trade-off, or what is the threshold for that trade-off?
In our case, it wasn't a trade-off. There were no SNAP recipients that lost payments or will lose payments if they are legally allowed to receive payments. The most recent figure that we have on SNAP is that close to $11 billion in SNAP payment errors last year alone had to be contended with. Again, if a person is eligible for supplemental need for the food program, which are SNAP benefits, They ought to get it. But we shouldn't be losing the dollars that can go to those needy people based upon errors, or 28% of able-bodied recipients receiving it when they could work. And so what we did is saying, listen, you can get your SNAP benefits. You can keep your Medicaid. But if you're able-bodied, you have to go out and perform some work. We didn't say what it had to be. We even said it could be significant volunteer work. But we're not going to give it to you if you're able-bodied and employable. If you are a single parent with dependents, nothing changes. If you are disabled in any way, nothing changes. But if you're able-bodied, we would be immoral in allowing you to continue doing things that keep you out of experiencing what true freedom is in a free enterprise system. And that's the fact that you can earn your own way. So we did it, I think, a very clear and compassionate way, saying we're not just going to cut you off. But if you're able-bodied, you're going to have to work or do a significant volunteer effort in order to keep receiving your SNAP or your Medicaid as well. That was also in that process. And ultimately, wean you off the system so you can carry on your own for your own.
Would you be able to point to a major vote in recent years where you would be able to solidly say you were there protecting workers with that vote?
Well, I think the overall bill, which was huge, the One Big Beautiful Bill, the Working Families Tax Cut Bill, had all sorts of things protecting workers, protecting their ability to keep their money, to use it for themselves, no tax on tips for our tipped workers. That's big. No tax on overtime for workers that have significant overtime or any overtime. I think of all of our law enforcement officers that had to put up with Democrat-funded demonstrators and work overtime, protecting ICE officials and the rest. They aren't paying tax on their overtime. We're thinking of the manufacturing worker that, because of a greater economy and the growth in the GDP that we saw just last week, with the job numbers that were out double of what was expected. We say to them, you can keep your income if it's overtime. And oh, by the way, we also kept the tax cuts in place that we put in 5 years ago that were going to expire at the beginning of this year, just passed. That would have expired, and my district would have received a 27% on average tax increase. That gave workers the opportunity to know that the work they were doing, they could keep the tax savings that they were justified just as much as big business that received it. And so those are just a couple examples of it. On another area in our education space, I chair the Education Committee. The first time ever we passed Workforce Pell. So if you're going back for retraining to increase your job capabilities, you have Workforce Pell. If you don't have the resources yourself, you don't have to go to a four-year institution or a community college to receive the Pell grant. If you're going to an apprenticeship program or going to a certification program, Pell is available for you as well. So those are just a few of the things that we've done to make sure the workforce space is cared for, honored, and recognized, as opposed to being treated by the Democrat Party as just a simple voting block. And we're going to tell you we're going to give you free dollars to take care of yourself on welfare, whether it's Medicaid or SNAP or you name it. We're going to take care of you. I'm saying, no, we're not. We're going to take care of you by saying you are capable. You should achieve the same things the rest of us achieve and have the ability to look at anybody in the eye and say, I did that. I cared for myself. And I found out the freedom of choices that I didn't have simply relying for the government to take care of me.
That is important, I would agree, absolutely, especially being able to stand on your own 2 feet for your life. Now, with us thinking about, worker protections and things of that nature, making sure they're able to take care of themselves in advance, what, if any, increase to the minimum wage would you be in favor of implementing?
The minimum wage holds people back. Right now in the state of Michigan, nobody performing significant work is being paid minimum wage. You go and you work at McDonald's, for instance, and I don't want to call out a specific name, but that everybody knows. You're making more than minimum wage in Michigan right now. Mm-hmm. We put minimum wage in. The only ones that make out better will be your union leadership, because now they will say we have to have a significant percentage higher than minimum wage, and so we bump up our salaries. The rest of the people are stuck at minimum wage. I mean, for my Democrat friends and colleagues to think that minimum wage does anybody well, it just doesn't work that way. I think of the state of California, which put a huge minimum wage requirement in. They're losing jobs. Businesses can't keep up with it, especially the smaller businesses. And the larger businesses can pay it. They can offer jobs that take away people's livelihood that they were in, move them to another position, and now these small businesses go out of business and less jobs are available. So I don't talk about minimum wage. I talk about living wage and the maximum wage that you can achieve in a country that allows you to prepare yourself for that, then to achieve it with competition for your employment, as well as the opportunity to start your own workforce.
And I think that's a good distinction too, because oftentimes we don't discuss why there is the position on the GOP side versus the Democrat side for minimum wage versus having that competition available. There is logic to that, and I would agree with in part a lot of that. I do want to shift gears slightly though and start talking about your Great Lakes priorities. So I do, because that's important to me. So what specific legislation have you personally advanced for the residents here in Lenawee County that we would notice that's in defense of our lakes?
Well, we are part of the Great Lakes Caucus, mm-hmm. and in that caucus we've worked together on a number of things. I was responsible, along with two other of my Michigan colleagues, Republican colleagues, in riding on Air Force One with the president. This was a few years ago during his first term, and explaining to the president why the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative was absolutely necessary for all of the Great Lakes states, why we needed to bump it up from where the Democrats had it. And we were attempting for years to get increased spending to improve our lakes, to deal with algae blooms and the like, to make sure that we had shipping lanes contained there and the usefulness of the Great Lakes was enhanced. We continued to work with the fishing industry and the rest. We were significantly capable because of our lobbying the president and getting that year it bumped up, and every year since then, an increase in funding for Great Lakes restoration. I was involved also in working with our agriculture community in setting in place a system that gives incentives for agriculture to use best practices in stopping the runoff of land, earth runoff, as well as nitrates and the rest that can leach into our water systems, whether it be streams, whether it be rivers, or ultimately into our Great Lakes. My district has two Great Lakes in it, Lake Michigan and Lake Erie. It's important for us to have that protection, and so we have pushed forward legislation that would establish for other states a pattern to follow that is just exactly what we do in Michigan in giving incentives to agricultural industry. We'd like to give more incentives to business and industry, manufacturing as well, that provides some significant challenges to protecting our water resources. Most recently, Debbie Dingell and I worked on invasive species issues, aquatic protection. Those pieces of legislation are still moving through the process here in Washington. But those are just a few examples of what we've done in protecting the resources that we have in the state of Michigan, and in fact, more importantly, the entire country.
So with like Michigan, obviously, that being an area that's pretty contested with water right now. I know Nestle has a lot of contracts and rights to this particular water as well. What are your opinions on whether Nestle's impact on having water taken out of the lake is going to impact negatively our district in general?
Well, I think it's important to evaluate what actually happened. Michigan is one of the Great Lakes states that has more Great Lakes surrounding it than any other state. It's hard for us to justify holding back the use of that resource when it can provide jobs and business opportunities for our own citizens. It has to be done appropriately, and that's where the evaluation comes into both the state and the federal level to make sure that what Nestle's takes is ultimately going to go back into the lake or the streams, the water resources of our land, and go back when they're discharging in a way that is environmentally sound and don't add to the pollution problems of our state. I think that's being done. We want jobs. We want chocolate, if we're talking about Nestle's, and we want those resources used appropriately for all of the above. We can do it. We've done it for years. And as I talk about my growing up experience on the south side of Chicago, right near Lake Michigan as well, but working at steel mills at a time when we could chew the particulate in the air, we saw the environmental concerns. It's no longer like that. We've taken a big effort in making sure that the same old isn't what we experience now. But we also don't want to waste the resources by not using them where they're necessary to provide a standard of living and good opportunity for the citizens of Michigan and surrounding states.
So what would you say is the biggest threat to the Great Lakes currently then? Would it be an invasive species of some sort, pollution? What would that be?
Well, I'd say it's radical environmentalism. And I sit on Natural Resources Committee, so I'm committed to doing conservation appropriately. But radical environmentalism, not based on science, based on simple philosophy that says we are not going to let humans use the resources we have, and we're going to try to restrict them through permitting processes that are excessive. That's the greatest danger. Because to waste natural resources, whether it be underground with natural gas or oil resources that can be used, or use resources relative to nuclear power, and then the general resources of water, minerals, to leave them wasted by not using them in an appropriate, environmentally sound way, that's what I see as the greatest danger. Beyond that, invasive species, by not working together, for instance, Asian carp. We worked in a bipartisan way for years to restrict the Asian carp from getting into Lake Michigan specifically, because that's where they're coming down from the Illinois River. Barack Obama held us back. He would not approve of the funding that we put in and give, I guess, punch to the legislative effort by calling on a bipartisan push to make sure that we did what was necessary to keep that invasive species from getting in. Thankfully, there was another issue we dealt with President Trump. He saw the need, and ultimately that whole system of locks and dams, as it were, electronic and otherwise, are nearing completion. And so far, we've had no incursion of the Asian carp into Lake Michigan, which could be a death knell to our recreational industry, as well as fishing that goes on there. And so that's an example of where we can look at certain things that we can control that have come from outside influences and make sure they don't impact us in a negative way. And that, again, was done in a bipartisan fashion. And I like to think that that Air Force One ride, where three of us took on the president and said, Mr. President, you need to know about this. And he got it. And that's when it all started up again.
So I know we were talking about kind of generally the policies that he was helping out with to make sure we're protecting these waters. What were some of those new policies that were being helped with, or what was the new policy itself that was being specifically pushed?
The expansion of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative.
Expanding it out.
Putting more funding in, which we needed. Okay. What was there was being used well, but we needed more. And I think we were able to prove that. on the Asian carp issue, Barack Obama yielding to the Illinois shipping interests as opposed to rational environmental protection that would not have hurt the shipping interest was the problem. President Trump saw that, said we can do both. We can continue allowing shipping to expand and develop on the Illinois River, the Mississippi, et cetera, but we can also keep that enemy to our interests that were brought in and dumped into ponds and streams that fed into the Illinois River that came down toward Chicago. And the lock and dam that was there, we could use that as resource to stop them until we can get a control and eradicate these Asian carp who should never have been here from impacting. I mean, we were talking about fish that were large enough and athletic enough, they could jump feet into the air, could hit fishermen or water skiers using our natural resources to the point of injuring them. And if they were to get into our ecosystem in the Great Lakes, to gobble down tons of fish that would destroy our fishing industry, recreational and otherwise. And so thankfully, President Trump understood that and said, we can do both. We can have shipping interests, but we can also protect our natural resources. And again, that was a bipartisan effort, but it was led by a president who got it and was willing to push back against something that shouldn't have been a problem of the shipping interest in Illinois.
Absolutely. So I want to shift gears slightly again, because obviously you're the head of the Education and Workforce Committee, and you've been working to try and reduce the cost of higher education. So we used to have affordable college in this country. What, in your opinion, has led it to become so wildly unaffordable for the average American?
Well, two things. One, we got the government involved in student loans. We moved the private sector away from student loans under the guise of saying, those are too expensive. Not every student can get a loan. The bank won't give them the loan for the education that they want. So we have to do it ourselves through really a protected student loan program where we set the interest rates and we allowed more and more people to have those loans. Well, what we found out was a good percentage of those students that got the government loan ended up in a worse place economically after they graduated because ultimately they didn't end up working in the field of the major that they went into. And that's not a good thing because now the taxpayer who has funded a lower interest rate on those student loans, arguably, if we would conclude that it was a lower interest rate, is left with the bill that paid for a student that ends up being just as well off had they not gone to college and just gone straight from high school, in some cases better situation than having gone to college. And so that was a problem. It was too easy for students to get student loans. Well, when you get student loans, you give carte blanche to the college education industry, and every dollar that was available in student loans was an opportunity to increase the cost of education and the tuition that was involved. And that's what we saw. Tuition continued to climb as students took out more and more loans, came out of their college education, and even if they got into the field that they wanted to be in, including medicine, they were saddled with a loan debt that either they felt they couldn't pay off or would take years and years to pay off. And then President Biden came in and said, this is a bad deal. So ultimately, pay off what you can. That was his Student Save Act. Pay off what you can. And if you make a good faith effort after 10 years, we'll absolve you of the loan. And who pays that loan off then? The taxpayer. So in my committee, we were tasked with finding a means by which we could put downward pressure on the cost of education. That means on tuition cost. We could also reduce student loan debt by having a more realistic program in place, and that's what we did. And what we found in my committee, doing the homework, we found a $350 billion saving by simply saying we're setting caps on what undergrads can get, what graduates can get, and we're going to do away with Parent Plus loans, because now we're finding parents who are mortgaging their homes and ending up paying the student loan debt through that process for years to come. That's what's in place now, and it will. We've already.
Mr. Walberg?
Hello? Are you
Hello?
there?
Oh, yep. Internet connection picked back up. Yes, I got you again. Hi.
Okay, I'll
Sorry.
jump back and say we're already seeing, as a result of what was approved in the One Big Beautiful Bill in the education student loan area, $281 billion of savings, downward pressure on the cost of tuition by capping what student loans could be received at both the undergrad and the graduate level. And now we're actually seeing illustrations of law schools and other graduate programs that for this coming year have reduced their tuition as a result of those caps. Now, I think it's going to end up working, and it's also going to force students, if they want to go beyond that, to go into the private sector market, and you're going to have a sound business approach that says that's a great major that you want, but you're not going to be able to take a loan and pay it off if at that level with that type of income capability in social work, which is highly needed, and in other programs that might be there. I think it's going to end up, like we've seen thus far, reducing the cost of education and ultimately reducing the need for student loans to the level that they have been used.
Excellent. So something else, because I am one of those students that you referred to, has the degree, didn't go into that field because for me, it was mostly state level stuff that kind of yanked out that industry for us. How would you approach bringing industry to states, like say, like we did with me, the film industry to Michigan, and preventing, say, from a pressure downward situation like you just described, preventing the state level reps from yanking the rug out from future students in that regard?
Well, I mean, we really can't, if you truly believe in federalism and states' rights,
it's kind of
states' rights, you let states do things to their benefit as well as to their negative impact. Michigan has done too many things in recent years to the negative impact. That's why we see an exodus from the state of Michigan. Not as much as California, but I don't want to be California. What we need to do is make it the best place in the world for people to locate, for businesses to locate. Why is Indiana doing well right now? Low taxes, greater opportunity for businesses to achieve, to draw employees in because of less taxes. They can live at a higher standard of living at a lower cost. The same is true with business. Michigan hasn't done that. The permitting struggles in Michigan, the high taxes in Michigan, the regulatory climate that's in Michigan has hurt that. We have great educational institutions. You stop and think of our major research institutions like Michigan State, the higher education institutions that go in specialty areas that we have as well that are doing great work in the classroom. But we too often lose the students from those institutions. They go to other states where they can make a better income based upon less taxation, less regulation, and oh, by the way, a good standard of living. Not as good as Michigan, I would contend. Pure Michigan is a great place to live. But when you make it less conducive to people being able to afford living in Michigan, that's a problem. And then you have an educational system in Michigan that is tanked out, 44th in the nation right now. That's terrible. As the chairman of the education committee, for me to have to say, that's my state, that hurts. That's embarrassing. We can change that. And all of that gives a reason for the film industry to come to Michigan, where they can have the full season effect. If they want to have pictures with snow in it, they've got that. If they want almost a mountainous terrain, they've got that. If they want agricultural, they've got that. If they need lakes without salt to mess up their electronic systems and no biting fish like sharks, they've got that. I mean, it's a beautiful place to be. if we also made it conducive to people living, staying, working, and developing industries in Michigan.
So, thinking of the education portion of us in the state, my father is somebody who essentially bankrupted himself, sending me and my siblings to private schools. How do we fix this situation where working class carpenters like my father aren't doing that, and they're able to just say, "Send me to the high school that's down the street"?
Yeah, we've started that, and that happened in the course of the One Big Beautiful Bill as well. We gave the first universal choice opportunity that people can deduct up to $1,700 of money given toward choice in education to a choice prescribing program. Mm-hmm. It has to be approved by the state leadership. And so we've been asking our governor to do what Indiana's governor's done already, what Ohio's governor's done already, and a multitude of other governors have said, okay, we'll take that. And it can be used for private education. It can be used for religious education. It can be used for homeschooling. It can be used for apprenticeship programs. It can be used in public schools to provide enhanced teaching capabilities. So it's not just for non-public schools. It can be used by all of it. And I would hope that Governor Whitmer will see the value of saying, even though it was done during a Trump administration, for the future parents like yours who say, I want something different. My particular public school system right now isn't meeting my needs. That's not an indictment of public schools, because there's some great public schools, but there's some, because of lack of resources or a program, that a parent says, no, I know a school down the street that's a private school that could supply this for my kid. Or I'd like to do home education, but it costs me for curriculum as well and other enhancements that I want to bring in. Mm-hmm. Well, it's available now, and they can get scholarshiping opportunities for, in your case, for you, to allow you to have resources to make that choice. And we did that. So too bad you've been through the program already and didn't have that available, but your parents could use that, or they as grandparents could use it for your kids now.
Yeah, I have a nephew. I have a nephew. There's situations where we could still boost his education up.
You could.
Yeah, and I guess my next follow-up for that would be, would you think that just having a more robust funding for public education would be the better alternative, or do you think that having that more privatized version still in a balanced sense like that is the better path forward?
Well, that's up to the states to make that decision of how important they see it is. You know, yesterday we had 3 superintendents in front of my committee, mm-hmm. chewing on them for some radical ideas that they're allowing in their schools. But the Chicago public school system, 97% increase in funding for that school between 2013 and 2024, 97% increase. Their outcomes, the results of the education that they were given, has a negative in the area of, if I recollect it in my mind and haven't switched them, in math, 63% minus, below level, and in reading, a 73% negative reduction. 97% increase in funding and negatives in outcome. That says it's not funding, just funding, that causes quality education. There's something missing there. And I bet the administrators of the Chicago public school system have had increases in their pay and their salary over that same period of time, and the outcomes are worse.
I wouldn't be able to speak to that one, but I will move ahead and because I know you've also recently advanced legislation targeting fraud in our federal programs, which also very important for us. How large is the fraud problem in dollar terms, and what evidence has convinced you to that it required congressional action?
Yeah, I don't think we've come to the end to be able to say how many billions of dollars of fraud that we'll find, or even maybe, sadly, up to in the trillions area. But I know in the educational area, we just passed this week another bill that dealt with students specifically fraud, receiving student dollars, grants, scholarships, Pell Grants, etc. It was the Go Student Reform Act.
I did see that, yes.
Because we found a big business in entities, in foreign entities, bots, etc., that will take the identification of a former student, not a student now, but a former student, social security number, whatever, and submit requests for student funding and have received it. It goes overseas in many cases. Legislation that we put through this week, and hopefully the Senate will pass as well very soon, takes aim significantly at that, putting provisions in place that will lock down as well as evaluate the actual identification sources that are coming in. For FAFSA, for instance, we already have that in place, and we've seen the impact that now with FAFSA filling that out, we can get immediate feedback on whether that student is legitimate or not. That's going to save billions of dollars in the process. We did the same 2 weeks ago with legislation looking at childcare, based upon what we saw taking place in the billions of dollars as well in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in their childcare systems that were just total fraud operations. No child care was being given. No facilities were being used that were given as addresses. And our legislation took aim at that as well. And so these are things that I think, we have a $39 trillion debt and mushrooming.
So looking back to it, the FAFSA stuff, how long do you think this has been going on? Because I know that there were reports back when I was in college and even before then of, similar things happening to people where they were having these student loans taken out in their names that they weren't doing.
It's been going on and it's gone across administrations, Republican and Democrat administrations. This is a bipartisan problem. But finally, this administration, with the Secretary of Education, Lenawee, and President Trump's push, coming with what we initially found with some of the DOGE issues, we began to see what was out there, and we couldn't walk away from it because it was public. When Mr. Shirley found what was going on in Minneapolis, all of a sudden it gave us purchase to go look further. And we found even beyond what he found. But it was because we couldn't back away from it. We couldn't say, oh, this may be happening, but it's a big deal. It's hard to get in and do the research and find out. Well, we've done that now. Good. And I think it's only whet our appetite to say the taxpayer should not be footing fraud, regardless of whether it's in education, whether it's in the labor area, whether it's in health and human services, you name it. It shouldn't be there. And I think now that the taxpayers seen that we're capable of finding this fraud, they expect us to find it and eradicate it. And that's what we're doing in my committee.
Absolutely, because that's obviously extremely important. We want these benefits to be there for people, but we don't want them to be taken advantage of or abused.
Sure.
And so
a social safety net is appropriate.
Yeah, but not
only for people who need it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but how do we, as we're doing this, to make sure that there's proper regulation there and properly making sure there's no fraud available, how do we make sure that it's not harder for legitimate claims and for people to actually get those benefits in a real way?
Well, that's important, and we know we won't do it with perfection. No. There may be a student, for instance, that applies for FAFSA, and AI pulls them out, and AI is being used, and it's being used in very productive ways as well. We have to find means by which we fix that, we repair that for that student. But I think for the most part, that's not going to be the problem. We are going to the benefit of the taxpayer, weed out that fraud and abuse of the taxpayers' dollars and the expectations of integrity that ought to be in the system. FAFSA I can talk through, because we have seen since this administration took over, FAFSA was not working. The amount of effort we tried to get the Biden administration to put towards making FAFSA work. In fact, we simplified FAFSA in order to help that out. They still couldn't make it work. And there was backlogs of months of parents and students waiting. In fact, one full year where students didn't receive their FAFSA information, so they couldn't get the resources that they needed. Now we have, as recently as this week, the ability to say the majority of individuals who fill out the FAFSA form, which is simplified, they get almost an immediate response before they're even off the system to whether or not they're going to get their funding. Yeah. If it goes beyond that, we're talking about days, not weeks and months. And so we know it works. And we also know that we've also caught fraud and said no to that as well. So I think we have an example with that one program, and we're going to continue building on it.
So whether it's environmental protection, college affordability, or benefits for preventing fraud, what measurable outcome should voters use to judge whether you've been successful at the end of your current term?
Well, one, that the most important thing is that I have done and acted and voted in a way like I said I would when they elected me. Yeah. And they've elected me now 9 times. Last time approaching almost 70% of the vote. They heard me say that I was conservative. I believed in limiting government. I believed in giving control of education to the states. And I'm on record now as supporting the ending of the U.S. Department of Education by any means possible, knowing that the Congress will not give us a vote yet in the makeup that we have to abolish the Department of Education. But we are reforming, redefining, making the system work better, shifting over responsibilities to other departments, still under the control of the Department of Education, but nonetheless being carried out where they used to be carried out, and I think doing it better. So to keep my promises of what I said I would do, whether people liked it or not, 36% of the people voted against me. That 36% could care less what I said. They didn't like what I said in the first place. But the ones who voted for me, approaching 70%, they want to know that I did exactly what I said I would do. Secondly, that I'm available to the people. I'm in the top 10 number of the entire 435 members of Congress for doing live town halls. I'm the only chairman, and there are 17 chairmen out of the entire Congress. I'm the only chairman who still does live town halls for all comers who ever come to those live town halls. We've done it all across the district. Yeah. And people that say that we're not willing to go out and meet with people where they are not telling you or anybody else the truth. So we continue to do that. We've done multiple teletown halls as well when I'm back in DC. Yeah. At least one per month that we do. All comers can get on, and we have Democrats that get on and take me on during that time on the phone line, as well as Republicans and everybody in between. So that's another reason why I think they should support me. We have not hid from the system. And then a third, and I think very important, my tenure in Congress has been backed up in its importance by receiving a chairmanship. That doesn't happen to a first termer. That doesn't happen to a second termer or a third termer. It takes some significant time spent in proving that you will be a chairman that knows the subject matter and is able to lead a committee. And in this era, with a tightly split minority majority, it means that I have to be able to, as Solomon, split the baby at times in working with my Democrat colleagues to make them understand that they're part of the committee and they are an important part of the committee, along with the majority members, and yet move things forward, sometimes in a compromised way that still don't violate the convictions that I've stated to my constituents as well.
Absolutely. So if elected, reelected to your 10th term now, given how tumultuous our current environment is, what is something that you feel needs to be done to start bridging that gap to be able to make more things bipartisan and not so much at the polar opposites?
Well, see, that's up to the electorate. They have to elect the people that are willing to do that. And right now, sadly, there's extremes on both sides that make it difficult. I cannot go. I cannot go to the extent that AOC wants to go. But Ilhan Omar, who sits on my committee, my education committee, she and I can work together where it meets the needs of her Minnesota and Minneapolis residents and my 5th District residents in Michigan, and still doesn't violate the chairman's public trust to his constituency. So some things we can agree on, that kids ought to have a good education, that kids ought to have a safe classroom. We can work together on that. And Ilhan and I, as an example, have voted the same way on several key things coming from our committee. But there are things I can't support. If you want socialism in this country, no way will I support any of that. If you want to cloister off education to just public education, I can't be there either. If you want to make union control total and supported by the federal government over the backs of employers and individual employees who want their own say, I won't be there. But if you want safeguards that unions have a place in the industry, as well as employers and individual workers, I'm there with you. And have the background as a former union steel worker, for instance. I think I understand those issues. So to be bipartisan, yeah, I want to be bipartisan. I want to be able to move this country forward. I know that it can't be my way or the highway, but I also know there is a line that is in red, it's drawn. I can go right up to that, but I can't put my toe over it. Now, how do I negotiate in such a way that I can bring the minority member over at least a little bit across that red line into the majority area that I hold? And they can feel they've won something, and I can feel I've stayed the course in what has to be done.
Well, that is a good sentiment to have, and I do appreciate you again taking the time out of your day to be able to sit down with me. And that'll wrap it up for us here this week in Lenawee. I'm Bryan Vish for WLEN, Lenawee's award-winning local news station.
Count on WLEN, Lenawee's local news station, to keep you informed with accurate and dependable information 24 hours a day.